Ronald the Rules Lawyer. My coverage of the Pathfinder 2e remaster, which comes out November 15, continues today with the Remastered Druid, the spellcasting nature class. I'm doing my best to keep up with my unrealistic expectation to get 10 videos out before November 15. That means I have to do this video and also cover the 3 martial classes tonight. So long as I work without interruption, I should be able to meet my goal. Rules Lawyer is not just a channel name. I am a lawyer, and I have been game mastering TTRPGs for the last 13 years, and most of that time I've run an after-school, middle-school, tabletop role-playing game class. Here's my current plan on upcoming videos for the remaster. Like, subscribe, and ring the bell to be notified. Also support my Patreon. It allows me to continue making this channel. You get exclusive access to videos, including my 3.5-hour video going over the Player Core and GM Core books, and other videos, and also get early access to videos as soon as I can post them. So on to the Druid. Well, fortunately, there's not as much to report on as there was with the Cleric. That was a massive video, and hopefully this trend continues through the other classes for my sanity. Before I go into the changes, because there's a lot of newcomers to Pathfinder right now with the remaster, I'm going to give a brief overview of the class. The Druid is our nature spellcaster. There are 4 magical traditions in Pathfinder, and they have access to the primal spell list. This has spells themed around nature and the elements and life. This includes the most powerful healing spell in the game that clerics get, called Heal, which also damages the undead, as well as Harm, which is the opposite spell. Also, the flashy damaging spells are all here, including Fireball. Also, nature-themed spells dealing with animals, plants, and the weather are all here. And their subclass at level 1 is to choose one of these 4 orders. They're the same ones from the current core rulebook. Each order gives you another skill proficiency. Each of these orders gives you an order spell, which is a type of focus spell. Focus spells can be cast repeatedly through the day. They use your focus point pool, and you get to regain a spent focus point with 10 minutes of refocusing. Animal gives you an animal companion and an order spell that lets you heal an animal. Leaf gives you a Leshy familiar that's an intelligent mobile plant creature. And the Cornucopia spell, which is the renamed Goodberry spell. The Storm Order gives you a lightning attack spell. And the Untamed Order is about changing your shape, formerly called Wild Shaping in D&D. But this is yet another name change in order to separate from the OGL. Your magical abilities are derived from your connection to nature, and so there's a list of things that are anathema to you. If you violate these, then you lose your magical abilities. These include despoiling natural places, and sharing your secret druidic language called Wild Song with non-druids. Every class can use shields in Pathfinder, but you have the additional general feat called Shield Block, which lets you, as a reaction, soak damage with your raised shield. Now, I'm not sure why druids get this in Pathfinder. There are other martial classes like the Ranger, the Barbarian that do not, but I've not seen players of those classes complain, and I've not seen druid players complaining. It is what it is. Also, this is Pathfinder, so you get to further customize your character with class feats. If you're coming from D&D 5e, think of Warlock Invocations. That's how feats work. They give you new abilities. And each order from the previous page gave you a level 1 druid feat for free. You get to get another druid feat at every even-numbered level. It can be a bit overwhelming to people new to the system, but thankfully there are 3 sample builds included in the druid section. Here is the sample Storm Druid, and it includes suggestions for starting spells. New players should note that a good number of the druid feats require that you have one of those orders. However, it's possible to have more than one order as a druid because of a 2nd level feat, so you can mix and match the benefits of these orders. Now on to what's new in the remaster. Well, this is going to be true with every spellcasting class, but it's important. It's the fact that your proficiency in spellcasting is universal. It applies to spells you gain from archetypes. Because you have a high wisdom as a druid, you can archetype into cleric and be able to use your eventually legendary proficiency with spellcasting on divine spells you get from a cleric archetype. So that's cool, and of course it works with other spellcasting archetypes. Also, I'll put the anathema up again because we have removed the restriction of having metal armor and shields, which admittedly was always a weird restriction that druids could not wear metal armor, but they could use metal weapons. I am not missing that restriction, and it's been replaced with Basically a statement of conservationism, don't consume more natural resources than necessary. Kind of a more substantive thing than what you wear. Being a druid is not just a fashion statement. The ability to communicate with animals has been replaced with the option of having that or the ability to communicate with plants. A level 6 feat that was exclusive to druids of the Leaf Order is now available to anyone with this class feature, without the +2 bonus to checks that the Leaf Order can get with that feat. I put the orders back up on the screen again because in the core rulebook right now, there's a weird situation where some orders give you a second focus point and others do not. Under the remaster rules, the number of focus points in your pool is always equal to the number of focus spells you have that cost a point, or 3, whichever number is lower. So I thought, oh, okay, it's been streamlined now. Everyone starts with 1 focus point. However, interestingly enough, the Untamed Order gets 2 focus points because they get this order spell and a first level feat called Untamed Form, which gives them the Untamed Form order spell. So they start with 2 focus points. I'm not sure that they planned for that, but it does give it an advantage. Counterpoint is that you generally don't need to cast both of those focus spells in the same combat. One gives you an aspect of an animal, the other lets you transform entirely into an animal. Okay, now we go on to feats. There are some new feats, and I'll also point out notable changes to current feats. I'm going to organize my investigation by the order that they support. A lot of the feats for the druid require that you have a certain order. First is the Storm Order, which got 3 new feats, in addition to the feats that it had before. Notably, the Storm Order has one of the best focus spells that are attack spells in the game. Tempest Surge does a d12 damage, calls for a basic saving throw, so does partial damage on a successful save. And if they fail, it makes them clumsy 2 for a round, and take persistent electricity damage. You can set it up so that all your allies attack after you do this. It stacks with the off guard condition. Okay, so the new feat, Snowdrift, is a spell shape spell. This is the new word for meta magic. It's something you cast immediately before casting your spell to enhance the spell. What this does is it coats the ground under the creature and all the spaces adjacent to it. So it scales with larger creatures and makes it into difficult terrain. Any creature can interact to clear the snow. It's a few inches of ankle-deep snow. And also fire spells melt the snow. The spell has to have the air, water, or cold trait and not have the fire trait, which kind of makes sense. At level 10, the druid can take the Thunderclap spell, Feat, which is another spell shape ability. It only works with spells that have the electricity trait or deal electricity damage. It has to not have a duration and call for a saving throw. If they fail there, and it says reflex save, I suppose all of such spells are reflex save spells, then they are deafened for 1 round, and those who critically save are knocked prone. Now, the deafen condition has gotten a little buff because, well, first, it's not exactly clear, but I think this is true. The deafen condition forces the creature to do a flat check to succeed at an action that has the auditory trait. The remaster has revised the rules on spellcasting components. There used to be a verbal component that had the auditory trait, but that doesn't exist anymore. However, the new section on spellcasting says that you must be able to speak to cast a spell, at least for most casters. So this means that spells that were somatic only, not verbal, things like lay on hands, one action heal, they can all be foiled by the deafen condition now. Admittedly, these 2 feats do sound kind of situational. However, you do have Tempest Surge and Electric Arc, and likely are able to use these often. At level 16, the Storm Order Druid can take Uplifting Winds. When they are flying, they get to move for free when they cast a spell that has the air or electricity traits, and they get a status bonus to their fly speed. Another reason, by the way, I think Tailwind, currently written as is a bad idea. Also, a small change to one of the focus spells the Storm Order Druid can get. Stormlord is that cool focus spell where you get to create a big storm and strike lightning down. Before, you had to cast the spell with 2 actions and then sustain the spell in order to get the weather effect. And it costs an action to strike lightning down. Well, the change is that you get the weather effect when you cast the spell. And you can tell I read every word of these focus spells and looked for every change that I could. This is why lawyers get the big bucks, at least some of them. The next order is the Leaf Order, the one that gets the Leshy familiar. First, I want to point out that their focus spell, Goodberry, has been renamed Cornucopia, but it's not exactly the same. The difference is that before, you touched a berry. Now, you create fruit that appears in your hand. It's an extremely small detail, but at least before, an ally could be holding those berries and have them already in their hand. At least we now have the throw action. But they still last 10 minutes anyway. You can prepare these before combat. But I don't see why you can't have the functionality of both. At least I just wanted to make sure people knew there was a teeny difference. Okay, there are some new feats added for the Leaf Order. Groan of Oak basically lets you have the Bark Skin spell, which is now renamed Oak and Resilience, essentially in effect all the time. That's the one that gives you resistance to bludgeoning and piercing damage. Resistance to 2 of the 3 different types of physical damage, well, the main types of physical damage, is a real buff to your survivability. Level 8 is Floral Restoration. You must be in a location of at least 15 square feet with healthy plant life. This can include grass, so I would, as a GM, make it pretty easy to qualify for. It heals you for 4d8 hit points and regains a focus point. Now, I note that it is once per day. This makes me wonder whether this was written before the revision to refocusing. Right now, you get to, if you have 2 or 3 focus points in your pool, you can get all of those points back between combats. There are a few feats currently in Pathfinder, like Champion's Desperate Prayer, that let you regain a focus point, but is once per day, indicating how precious and valuable regaining that is. Under the new rules, maybe this is a bit underpowered then. Then there's a level 12 feat called Garland Spell. It's a spell shape spell. In the area of the spell that you are about to cast, you get to create a 10-foot burst of plants that are difficult terrain and hazardous terrain. Any creature that enters it takes damage. Only once per turn, however. The damage can be piercing or poison. The damage scales up at higher levels. The damage is admittedly modest, but making it difficult terrain and hazardous terrain could be useful in controlling the battlefield. Then we have the Untamed Order, the one that changes shape. A small but important change in the focus spell Wild Morph, the one that lets you get a claw attack and potentially other additional aspects of animals when you take more shape-changing feats. But currently, it requires that when you attack with your claw, you are not holding an item. You have to have your hands empty. They have thankfully changed it so that you just need to have that hand or claw free when you attack with it, which honestly was probably the original intent. Kind of the whole idea of Wild Morph was to be in a hybrid form that still let you cast spells and do what you normally did, including fight with weapons or block with shields. So this is welcome. And that's it for the Untamed Order. There are actually no new feats to speak of here. As for the Animal Order, we get new feats that are available to anyone who has an animal companion. And a druid of any order can take the level 1 Animal Companion feat. It's just a little harder for them to get the special focus spell to heal an animal that they have. These are the new feats. Level 6, they can get Instinctive Support. This is a nice action economy saver. Basically, when you cast a spell targeting your animal companion only, and there are spells, then it's as if you commanded your animal companion. However, only for their special, specific to each animal's support ability. And those spells can be your heal animal focus spell, Runic Body, which used to be called Magic Fang, and Enlarge. Many of the support abilities work in tandem with you attacking with a weapon. So this helps in those turns where you're multitasking, want your animal to attack, cast a spell, and make an attack yourself. At level 10, there's this feat, Primal Howl, which is really cool. It gives them a new advanced maneuver in addition to the one they can get from an advancement feat. It lets them screech or howl and do sonic damage and try to frighten creatures in a 30-foot cone. Okay, so now on to feats that don't necessarily have anything to do with any of the orders. There's one new feat called Raise Menhir, which is a stone monument. Once per hour, you get to erect this monument, takes 2 actions, and all creatures get a bonus to their saving throws against a certain magical tradition of your choice that is not primal. It lasts for 1 round, but you can sustain it. It's interesting thematically. It seems pretty situational, but there's a lot of spells that have more than one tradition, and +2 is nothing to sneeze at. Then I want to comment on this feat, which looks unchanged. Primal Summons, a level 12 feat that gives you a focus spell, a spell-shaped spell that enhances animals and plants and fungi that you summon, that infuses them with one of the elemental planes. Well, nothing's changed here, except for the fact that since Rage of Elements released earlier this year, there's now 6 elements in the Golarion campaign setting. There's now also metal and wood. So the Primal Summons focus spell lets you infuse that cat you summon with metal and have it do electricity damage and get resistance to electricity, or with wood and give it a climb speed and resistance to bludgeoning and piercing damage. Okay, now miscellaneous. There's a feat currently for druids called Woodland Stride that only druids of the Leaf Order can take that lets them ignore difficult terrain caused by natural foliage. It also had this sentence, even plants and fungi manipulated by magic do not impede your progress. Well, it looks like it survives, but it's renamed because of the OGL to Forest Passage. However, the last sentence about avoiding the effects of magically manipulated foliage is no longer there. I honestly think this is an editing error. And yes, there are magical effects like entangling flora, formerly known as entangle, that do more than just create difficult terrain. So I personally think tables, unless we hear something different, should be okay with using the old language. It is a pretty situational feat to begin with. My other miscellaneous comment is that when I looked at the focus spells for the 4 different orders, I saw that the animal order only has 1 that it can choose from, heal animal. There's no additional order spells that it can take. And given that the remaster keys the size of your focus point pool to the number of focus spells you have, I think this is maybe something to fix. At my tables, at least, I would allow a druid to take up the ranger focus spell, Enlarge Companion, with a potential level 4 feat, so that they can increase their focus point pool. Now, druids can already cast the Enlarge spell, but allowing this would allow the animal order druid to increase their focus point pool and make their cat big more often. So I also investigated the primal spell list because spells are the primary class feature of the druid after all. With my limited time, I looked for things that were notable, and here is what I found. First, I need to make clear that it looks, from what I've seen so far of the divine spell list and the primal spell list, that a goal of the Player Core 1 book is to bring in as many spells they can from the core rulebook and the advanced player's guide. Out of the hundreds of spells I've seen so far, I've only found 2 spells that come from a book that is neither of those 2. And I'll point them out. And I think there's a reason for those. So basically, our new core books are limited to replacing those 4 core books and to live happily alongside and not step on the toes of Secrets of Magic, Dark Archive, and other Pathfinder rulebooks. Also, someone who wants to deep dive into playing the druid would be remiss not to look at many of the spells that are from this year's Rage of Elements book, which has a load of new primal elemental themed spells. Okay, but back to this book. The first thing to point out is here is the cantrip spell list. These basically are the same as from the core rulebook. There's the expected changes to some names because of the OGL, and the removal of alignment has caused a couple of other changes, but nothing surprising. Also, what I observed with the divine spell list, where there was a lot of fidelity to what was in the books for the lowest spell ranks that dropped off at higher spell ranks, I found that to be not true here. Even at the higher spell ranks, I saw a lot of preserving what exists now, while cutting some spells in order to keep this book relatively small. Now, in my coverage of the different spellcasting classes, I'm going to focus on different aspects of the spell list. And here, for the cantrips at least, I'm going to focus on the ones that do damage and point out what I see. First of all, Electric Arc remains a very good cantrip, still the best cantrip because of how flexible it is. You get to attack 2 targets within 30 feet of you. However, if we're going by Pathfinder Society Organized Play, there is a slight reduction in its damage, which I'm kind of happy to see. If you want to do more damage to an individual creature, there are other cantrips for that. Caustic Blast stands in place of Acid Splash, and to me it looks like it's a buff. Instead of targeting one creature and then doing 1 splash damage to that and surrounding creatures, we now have a 5-foot burst, which means it targets 4 squares on a standard battle map. It's an area attack, and every creature in that area takes 1d8 acid damage. Also, it's a saving throw spell, so it has a partial effect even when they succeed on their saving throw. So that's exciting to see. Next, we see a cantrip that comes from Secrets of Magic, and it's Gouging Claw. I think the reason is because we have the druid, and it's very appropriate because you attack with an animal-like claw. But this saw a buff, and it was already considered one of the stronger cantrips before. Whereas it did physical damage and on a crit did persistent damage, now it does that persistent damage on a regular success. And that persistent damage doubles on a crit, as per usual. So that looks like a buff. Next is Frostbite, which stands in place of Ray of Frost, another OGLism. Ray of Frost remains a legal spell because it has not been replaced with an identically named spell. But that was the one that had the 120-foot range, much longer than 30 feet of most other cantrips. This one has a reduced range of 60 feet. However, instead of an attack roll, it calls for a saving throw. In fact, a fortitude saving throw. A ranged fortitude save, I think, may be unique to this. There's probably going to be someone who finds one in the comments. I'm waiting for it. But anyway, versatility is the name of the game. Also, when they critically fail, they get a modest weakness to bludgeoning damage for a round, and that wasn't there before. Now, onto the leveled spells. I did not have time to read every single spell and compare the language between the two versions. I'll share what I've found. Besides the name changes, and there are many, here's some things I found. Thunderstrike. This stands in place of Shocking Grasp, which currently is a melee spell attack and does a whopping 2d12 damage with the first rank spell slot. Now it does 1d12 electricity damage and 1d4 sonic damage. However, that is countered by the fact that it now has a 120-foot range. It has the theme of striking lightning from the sky, which is appropriate for a druid. Also, it calls for a saving throw instead of requiring an attack roll, giving it more reliability. Whether it's stronger or weaker than Shocking Grasp, if we go by Pathfinder Society organized play rules, both spells remain legal because they have different names. They each have their own use case. Next is Floating Flame. This stands in the place of Flaming Sphere. This, in my opinion, has been buffed, and it's cooler. Flaming Sphere currently lets you sustain it and move somewhere else on the battlefield and affect its new destination, and that was once per turn. Now, when you spend an action to sustain it, it travels 10 feet and affects each creature in whose space it's shared at any point during its flight, including, I think, the origin square. So it can affect 3 squares when you sustain it, but it's only moving 10 feet, which is the limitation. I kind of wish the speed could scale up. You can sustain it multiple times to make it travel a farther distance, but a given creature can take damage from it only once per round. Also, because it affects a square, it's an area attack. Next is the group of spells that remove conditions and afflictions. And I went into this in detail in my cleric deep dive, and I'll have a link to the timestamp in the video description. But to summarize, they've consolidated these into 4 different spells and also rebalanced them and made it possible for them to affect more conditions. Okay, next is Howling Blizzard, which is our stand-in for Cone of Cold. Currently, it affects a 60-foot cone and does 12d6 cold damage. That's now reduced to 10d6, however, it's now more versatile. You can do the usual 60-foot cone if you spend 2 actions, but you can also spend 3 actions for it to affect a 30-foot burst, so a 60-foot diameter circle, within 500 feet. This is easier to aim. Also, additionally, it makes the entire area difficult terrain, including for flying creatures, it looks like. And besides, the 12d6 damage, I think, was above par for that spell rank. So this looks like an improvement in my opinion. And it's a cooler name. And I'm thankful we're moving away from the OGL because this has more versatility than a cone. Okay, next is, we have Summon Dragon. It's every spell tradition now. It seems like with the remaster that they have rethemed dragons. They moved away from the OGL, so they no longer have the chromatic and metallic good-evil dichotomy. Instead, the dragons are keyed in with all 4 traditions of magic. So that means every spell tradition is going to have a summon dragon spell and a way to transform yourself into a dragon. As I joked on my other video, this is the dragon game. However, I do want to point out something that I think is a new language. There's something called the summoned trait, and there's a place in the book where it's defined. However, there's also this sidebar right next to where the summon spells are in the spell section that says, unless noted otherwise, the creature must be common. I'm not aware of this restriction before. So that's something to look out for and may reduce the already amazing flexibility and versatility of summon spells. Okay, next is, well, this actually is the core rulebook, Polar Ray spell. They're not republishing that. It is thematically being replaced by Arctic Rift, which is just cooler. Before, it was just an attack spell, and if it hit, it did cold damage and might drain them. But here, you affect an entire 120-foot line, and every creature in it, they must do a saving throw, so more reliable. It does more cold damage, and instead of making them drained, if they fail, it makes them slowed 1 for a round. And if they critically fail, they get buried in ice. This is a straight upgrade and makes the Polar Ray spell look sad in comparison. Okay, then we have Windwalk. This is the one where you turn into wispy clouds and get to travel over land really fast for 8 hours. That's now been replaced by a spell called Migration, where you get turned into animals, and you get to have burrow speeds even, as well as fly speeds and swim speeds, so more flexible. And you can also, any creature can shape back into their normal form with the sustain action and go back into animal form. So this is now more versatile, and that's neat. Now our classic high-level damage spell, Meteor Swarm, has also been revised and renamed into Falling Stars, which is obviously a cooler name. Stars are bigger than meteors. And instead of doing fire damage in its larger burst, you have a choice of doing sonic, fire, cold, or electricity. The last spell I'll cover is Shape Change. This is the one that for a minute lets you go from shape to shape to shape. Now it operates the same with the name Metamorphosis. However, you get 40 temporary hit points each time you change. If you are a shape-changing druid, this is quite powerful, I would think. A single action to get 40 temporary hit points during the duration. So that's my tour of notable changes I found in the primal spells. I also examined the animal companions and looked for significant changes there. And I didn't find any. It looks like everything is the same. They include all the animals from the Advanced Player's Guide here, which doubled the number from 8 to 16. They're all here. The only thing I found is that Crocodile, their tail, now has the Agile trait instead of the Finesse trait, which makes sense. That probably was intended to begin with. It does less damage. And Finesse did nothing for it. And that was it. So nothing to report there, which is news. I'm happy to be your servant. And we now go to my closing statement on the Druid. Well, definitely fewer changes than with the Cleric. They didn't have a mission to rebalance one of its subclasses. Nothing to say, except that the Druid has always been a cool class. Even in the playtest era of 2018, the fact that it could lean as far as it wanted into these traditional Druid areas that are very diverse and make you potentially very versatile was already well developed then and is a very appealing aspect of the class now. And for the purpose of brevity and keeping myself sane, I now move on to my outro and ask everyone to like, subscribe, and ring the bell and to get notified of my future remaster coverage. Also, join my Discord. We're now almost at 4,500 people. People talk Pathfinder 2E, play Pathfinder 2E in our drop-in organized play system, and I read and post there frequently. And please support my Patreon. It allows me to continue doing this channel and give it the amount of time I've been giving it lately. And you get exclusive access to videos, including my 3.5-hour recording, going through the player core and GM core with members of my Discord, and also early access to many of my videos. By the time you're seeing this, I almost certainly will have more remaster coverage already available on my Patreon. So that's it. I've been Ronald the Rules Lawyer, and I'll see you next time.